And now please welcome from Apple, Lisa Jackson and M. Sanjan from Conservation International.
Thank you for being here, and thanks to everyone for being here this morning. Let me kick this off right away. So, one of the things that I have seen is a real sea change in how climate and conservation and nature is now portrayed around the world. You know, you were in Glasgow recently, and if you think about kind of the focus at Glasgow compared to 5 years ago in Paris, you know, it just feels like there's been a real shift. I remember going to an Aspen Institute event at the Ideas Festival as a fellow, as an Aspen fellow, and climate was just one tiny, tiny piece of the program. And today you have an entire conference put on by the Aspen Institute in Miami focused on climate. You've been the head of the EPA before your role at Apple. You've been in this business for a long time. What do you think has created that change, and is it going fast enough?
Yeah, I think current events, the incidents of climate-related catastrophe, crisis, drought, flood, the sort of manifestation of the water cycle in unfavorable ways for too many communities brings it up. I think our young people are fed up and feel like we're handing them an unsustainable situation, and so they've raised this issue into consciousness again, such that politically there is energy and moment around the issue. But you know, I with you. I think climate's been around for a while. I mean, we've had almost annual reports, it feels like, from IPCC telling us we're not doing enough faster. So maybe part of what's implied in the question is what we heard in the last panel, which is, you know, solutioneering. People believe that we have solutions. We just need to figure out how to spread them around the world, how to actually change systems and incentives so that the solutions that we know are out there can become widespread and part of our culture. So I think that's sort of the moment we're in. I could say, you know, I grew up in New Orleans, so I could say that forever I've known what a hurricane is and how it can hit. If you live in Florida, much the same. But of course, you know, Katrina, when you see the worst case scenario coming true and we continue to see record droughts or record floods or record wildfire seasons, I just don't believe that is something that people can ignore.
Yeah. I mean, for me, what's been surprising is like when we, you know, this topic is certainly on everyone's mind. And when I started in conservation, you know, I really thought it was pretty much a niche business. And I was going to do something in faraway places in a pretty limited scope. But the scale of it today and the people who are involved in it today has just been like quite dramatic and unbelievable to me in a good way. And I think the last 2 years of lockdown were kind of amazing because literally every company that we had a partnership with, you know, didn't just stay in it. They doubled down, tripled down. Like our conversations with Apple, for example, just went from, you know, kind of a small idea and inception to now really at a scale that I clearly would never have imagined. So I think that's good. And I think we're on the right track. I just don't know if it's still fast enough.
I mean, you mentioned Glasgow, and I think that is part of it. Kudos to the UN, kudos to Glasgow for forcing, say, companies. I'll talk about the private sector where I am right now. You know, it wasn't acceptable to go with some milquetoast commitment around climate. And I think part of what we try to do at Apple is ensure that our actions meet our commitments and our words. But increasingly, I think this idea that everyone has to be doing their part and we're watching is a good thing for climate change and a good thing for the kind of innovations I know we're going to talk about, which is climate and conservation together.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit more about what Apple is doing in this space in a little bit more detail. And I'm picking on this partly because, I mean, you'll see this today, I'm sure. You've already seen it with two business leaders today. It's amazing how absent government has been in this debate. You know, the excitement and the innovation and the speed and the scaling is in the private sector. And I just would not have thought of that, a few years ago. But clearly that's where the leading is happening. So what is Apple doing in the sustainable sector overall, but then specifically with the work we're doing on climate?
Yeah, I want to start by just contextualizing. As much as the private sector can do, I happen to believe that we cannot make the progress we need to without government. So we have to all keep the pressure and the conversation with policymakers going and insist upon leadership there. Even where we're not seeing it, we have to insist on it. So I want to be clear on that.
Because the scale of government is so much bigger?
Because the scale is bigger, because we can all lead. Companies can lead from the front, and that's what we're doing at Apple. I feel really strongly that's our responsibility to do, but we're trying to do it the right way. But they're all the people who are laggards, who there needs to be a floor. Government, I think, sets a floor, and that's really important because businesses compete with each other. And so in good times, everyone runs and everybody sort of leads from the front. But in bad times, you can start to see people leading from, falling to the rear. And that's what I think we have to guard against. And government sets policy, government sets financial and economic incentives. I mean, all those things, you can swim upstream, but you can't do it without government assistance. Very different with the assistance that we expect to see as infrastructure money rolls out over the next years, compared to what we were seeing even a few years ago in this country. Back to Apple, I have to set the stage, because if you start and jump in and talk about natural carbon removal, people say, oh, all you're doing is offsets. We just announced our carbon footprint. Every year we celebrate Earth Day at Apple. That's the reformed EPA administrator and me. And our carbon footprint stayed steady this year. We had to use a few offsets to do that, but our revenues went up 33%. So the big news is that Apple's been carbon neutral for our own operations since 2020, but the significant investment we've made in greening our supply chain, getting our suppliers on clean energy, as well as increasing the amount of recycled material that we use. We're up to 20% of the products we ship are recycled material right now, and we've said we want to get to 100% recycled or renewable materials in our products. So those two things have really helped us break the chain between consumption and carbon footprint. Very proud of that. But when we look ahead, we've promised that we will erase our scope 3, so all of our supply chain, as well as our user energy needed to charge our devices. So hopefully some of you, our users, we have to green your energy too, otherwise we haven't taken care of our whole carbon footprint. That we'll do by 2030. And
it's just around the corner. I mean, that's not one of those 2050 kind of commitments. You're making commitments that hopefully you're going to see through, or at least your team is for sure going to see through.
No, it's absolutely going to happen. Me? Maybe not. But my team, 100%. And I mean, technology does change fast, so I feel really certain. We have a roadmap. When we look at that roadmap, though, at least in the current moment, there are some things, aviation fuels are really good example, but in general, logistics, we have to move products around the world. Those are things that we are probably not going to be able to see the kind of change we need at scale by 2030. So about 20-25% of our current carbon footprint will probably still need to be offset. We'll continue to work, and hopefully it won't be that much, but that's where nature comes in. We've looked at technologies. There's certainly wonderful carbon removal technology out there, but we really resonated with what you're doing at CI on mapping irrecoverable carbon, which I want to ask you about next, but also on nature-based removal. The innovation we're trying to bring is to find we have something called the Restore Fund, which we work on with Conservation International.
You launched that last year.
Last year with you, thank you. And the idea of the fund is to invest in working forests around the world, but to pay dividends in two ways. So first, $1 in, you're going to get more than $1 out. You would actually be able to see a financial positive return. But we also gauge fund performance by carbon removed from the atmosphere. We're looking to scale up to 1 million tons a year coming from the Restore Fund. So we're trying to find ways to make capital work on our side, because so much of clean energy is now cheaper than conventional energy. So should be carbon removal. It should be and can be cheaper than conventional energy. The reason we went with you is because I have a strong bias towards community solutions that bring justice and additional opportunity to communities. and you all did too. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about the work you've done on irrecoverable carbon and also community work.
Sure. And just to put a finer point on that Restore Fund, what was so exciting about this fund that Apple created with help from us and participation from us is that it really does put capital to work. So until that point, my approach to going to a company was always sort of on the charitable side, on the grant side. And that is clearly important. You do need grant money, you need charitable money to make things work in some ways and take that risk and innovate. But when you can really use the capital that a company has to do something really positive and good while at least preserving the capital, hopefully getting a return, then you really can have dramatic impact at scales that I would never have imagined. And the Restore Fund is truly a unique kind of fund that certainly was new for us, and I think new for the folks at Apple as well. It took a lot to get it going, but it's now been we're on the first year, we're doing great with it, but the idea is to then scale it and really put capital to work in a very positive way for the carbon budget, but for communities, but then also to make sure you get a financial return or at least preserve capital. So on communities and recoverable carbon, so one of the things that we've done, CI has been in the space of carbon offsets for a long time. And for the vast history of our organization, it was a tiny, tiny part of the business. We always thought this was a market that was coming, and it was one of those things like fusion, which is basically now here, that we didn't think was going to really happen. And then that changed. It changed in about 2 years, and it's become such a dominant force now that we are in a very unique position today, where we are no longer constrained by demand. We're constrained by supply. And the supply that consumers want, that companies want, that Apple wants, is high quality supply. So what do I mean by high quality supply? First and foremost, that these are communities that want to have these projects, that the carbon is actually really being captured, and we can verify that at the highest verification standards possible, both standards that exist out there, but also our own internal standards. And biodiversity is being protected as well. And we're choosy about who we do the business with. And one of the reasons why the work with Apple was so important to us, especially as we started getting to things like blue carbon, which is carbon that is found in the oceans, basically. So it's carbon trapped underwater. So if you think about carbon on the planet, right? So everything green is carbon, and it accumulates in the soil and accumulates in living tissue, particularly trees. Some areas of the planet have more carbon than others. The ultimate in carbon, like if you want the best of the best of the best, is essentially blue carbon. It's mangroves. Mangroves off the coast of Florida, right here. That has sometimes 6 times more carbon than you would find in an equivalent patch of, say, tropical rainforest. Because that carbon not only is in the trees, but it's also deep into the soil, 6 meters down into the soil in places like the carbon off the coast of Colombia or Brazil. So blue carbon's kind of an innovation. It's also easy to monitor. It's important for coasts. It's got multiple benefits. But when we approached blue carbon, no one had done that before. And when we established the methodologies for it at scale, we were looking to see who would be a great company to partner with to get that carbon offset. And Apple was our first choice, partly because you guys have unbelievably high standards. You have a brand that's enviable. And so we thought, look, if we do this with Apple and we can pull this off at that scale, then it really does set a bar. I was also very attracted to the fact that, when we started talking, Lisa, your own background and your own commitment to communities and people of color and indigenous peoples was super important to us. And because we work in places like Colombia with Afro-Caribbean descendants of Colombians on the coast, for example, or in Liberia or Cambodia, difficult places that most other companies would run away from, we found in you and Apple a kindred partnership.
Yeah, we decided, and this is another thing that young people have really done well, is to not allow us to separate the imperatives around climate change from the imperatives around justice. And in so many cases, there are solutions out there that increase injustice, which are not of interest to us. We do have a belief that there needs to be community investment and empowerment whenever possible in our projects. And so the work in Colombia that we're doing together, obviously the incredible science that CI represents, mixed with our ability to, our treasurer was involved in that project. I would love to say it was me, but how cool was it to watch the treasurer of our company, Gary Whippler at the time, he retired, but he got so into making sure that it met all the treasury requirements because we didn't want it to be a grant. We've done grants with you before, we'll do them again, but we wanted this project to appeal to the other treasurers out there, and so Gary saw it that way. I have to give a word for other community impacts. We do power for impact projects around the world. We don't do those with CI, but wherever we have a small load, we look to address that load with projects in places like the Philippines or Thailand. Those loads are small right now, but we have customer load there, and business load. And so we can do projects on schools or hospitals or others that bring clean energy into those communities so that the new clean energy on the grid is actually an opportunity for demonstration and education for the community, which is really important. You need the community to see opportunity in the fact that Apple wants clean energy. Otherwise, it sort of feels like something over there, not something here in the here and now. So really important.
We've only got a couple of minutes here, so should we talk a little bit about this Irrecoverable Carbon Finance Lab that we just kicked off?
You should do it.
Okay, so there's this thing called Irrecoverable Carbon, and it's something that our scientists at CI, but lots of other scientists as well, Nature Conservancy and others, who participated in really kind of mapping carbon around the world, right? So if carbon is really important, and you saw David Lucien here talk about his ranch and the carbon that's on the 110,000 acres in Montana, the question is, well, how much carbon is there, and can we map that? And so we did this at a global scale, and you can scale it down to sort of, half a kilometer square sort of pixels, so it's pretty fine scale. And here's the two really important things. One is that carbon is not evenly distributed around the planet, right? It's actually very patchy. And there are some places that are chock full of carbon. And it turns out that if those places are lost, we cannot recover that carbon back in any human-relevant time frame. So for you or your grandkids, that is super important. And now here's the best news of this. 3.5% of the surface area of the planet contains 50% of the world's irrecoverable carbon, which means you have a fighting chance. You have a fighting chance in investing, protecting, buying, doing whatever you need to do, whatever methodology you want to use to protect it or restore it, you can get an enormous amount of carbon. Much of it does lie on indigenous lands and territories. All of it is extraordinarily high in biodiversity. So you get you can actually help communities, rural communities that are often without jobs. You can put them into a different kind of economy, and you can protect biodiversity. And so we wanted to focus on that. But the innovations we need today, frankly, when I went to grad school, we don't have the capacity and the skills that we need to really tap into this and do it at the scale that we need to do it at to make a difference to your lives. So through a grant in this case with Apple, but it's open source, so we want everyone to participate in it. We created a new Irrecoverable Carbon Finance Lab. It's currently going to focus on the Americas, so places like Bolivia and Peru and Ecuador and Guyana, high in carbon, but we can expand it beyond that as well. And the idea here is to figure out the science innovations and the financial innovations that we need to have in order to really scale up carbon and carbon offsets. So that was, can I just close with just one last question to you, because I think this is super important to both of us. When we go to conferences that are focused on the environment, I definitely feel like I used to feel a lot more than now, that I'm a little bit of an odd person out. I'm from the Global South, and to have a leader for an environmental organization from the Global South, certainly when I started, was kind of a new thing. I'm sure you felt that in the corporate world as well at times. Is that changing? Are we bringing more voices to the table? Are we doing a good enough job on it? I know you're going to say probably not. So then I'm going to say, what can we really do to make a difference so that what we are trying to create with climate change, with carbon offsets, with carbon financing can truly be inclusive?
Yeah, it is changing. It's not changing fast enough. And it is when you say we, I think it's the people in this room who I know understand and care about these issues who have to take to heart. I mean, when you hear about irrecoverable carbon, I was with you 100% except for buy, right? If indigenous people have that land and indigenous people have managed it to the point where that carbon is still there, I'm really interested in us putting our big brains to how we continue that management and not necessarily take it and move and set up the constant and old sort of paradigm of, you know, wealth coming in but not helping the communities. So I think that is what I want to spend the rest of my time on this planet doing, which is, of course, working on climate change. It's my passion, but doing it in a way where we are representing the communities that we come from, where people see opportunity. Until people see opportunity in climate, in addressing climate change, they're still going to see it as a luxury that they can't afford because they're dealing with so many other things. So I want to thank you for your work. I'm committed to doing it with you.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
And I would just say my buying thing was really to refer to the Scottish peatlands. So there's so there's some great peatlands up there. And I think you can actually buy that one. But yes, I completely agree. Ultimately, it has to be in the best interest of the people who live there. Thank you, Lisa.